MacVoices is sponsored by MintMobile. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, there are some guests we just never get back often enough. I try so hard, and the scheduling doesn't work out, or circumstances don't work out.
Should have gotten one of them today.
Well, and there you go. So I have no introduction other than Mr. Bryan Chaffin. Bryan, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Chuck.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on now. You know what? Maybe I'll sound a little better.
Oh, you sounded good before, but now you sound
apologies.
Very present.
Very, very present. I could do this if you'd like. I can, could do the whole interview like this. Pretend like we're on the radio.
Yeah, like do a Barry White maybe?
Yeah, I've tried. I can't.
You can't? Okay.
No,
okay.
Not quite.
Okay. Well, yeah, we do what we can.
We do what we can, yeah.
So I'm catching you at sort of an interesting time because as we record this, it's the day before iPad OS and iOS 13 come out.
Yeah.
It's a couple days before the new iPhones and the new Apple Watches arrive. But there's still plenty of news, and there's some things that I think I can ask you without having to tread on some of those very timely topics. And,
sure,
we'll come back later. But the one thing that did happen today is Steve Dowling, head of Apple PR, has stepped down. And I know that had a significant impact for you. What's the impact for the rest of us?
Well, the reality is that I think I've said this on your show before, Joe, but Joe, what's your name? Chuck?
Sam.
Sam. I think I've said this before on your show, Sam. Apple's PR department, I don't know where that came from. Apple's PR department is unique in the world. Like, not even just the corporate world. It's like unique in the world because every other PR company, their job is to get you to say something, anything about their company, about their employer. And Apple's PR department, their mission is to control the message. And oftentimes they give you as little to work with as possible, if, better yet, nothing to work with. And that is like only Apple has that power. And Apple has that power because of Steve Jobs and Katie Cotton. And when Katie left in 2014, what was that? Is that 3 years after Steve died? 3.5 years, I think, after Steve died.
That sounds about right.
And she left, and she had built this iron tight PR department that was just locked down, and the company was locked down, the employees were locked down, everybody was locked down. They ruthlessly chased leaks and everything else. And then Steve Dowling was put in charge, and I remember at the time wondering whether or not he was temporary, and then whether or not this was actually a signal of change, because we had worked, occasionally with Steve Dowling, as we worked with most of the people at Apple PR, and he was always, a little bit more open, always professional, always doing towing the Apple line and everything. And sure enough, he starts to open Apple PR up at least a little bit. And it wasn't that Apple PR became an entirely new organization, but first of all, it grew as Apple was growing. And that was a big part of it. Like, as I wrote today, when Steve Dowling took over, Apple was still in the transition process from going from being the company that was like doomed and beleaguered to like all the major news organizations around the world, like assigning one or more full-time reporters to covering Apple alone. And it was because Apple was becoming this huge company. It was becoming fabulously successful. It was because it was making more money than any company had ever made, and it was this giant juggernaut that was like really changing the world. If you look at the effects of everything that Apple has done and the way technology, I mean, just like thinking about how ubiquitous and necessary smartphones are in our life today, and that wouldn't be a thing if it wasn't for iPhone. And this was all happening then. I mean, the iPhone revolution was certainly well underway, but like Apple became this completely different company, and it had never before been subjected to so much attention. You go back to the 80s and 90s, and you've got people, especially actually late 80s and 90s, you've got people dumpster diving from Macweek or even Macworld looking for documents that they could piece together and like find out something that Apple was doing that they could have a scoop with. And that was like Apple's big nemesis. But now the Apple's big nemesis is the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post calling up, or Reuters or Bloomberg calling up and saying, "Hey, I've got this. What do you have to say?" And it's just such a much different world. It's not that Apple didn't ever work with mainstream publications under Katie Cotton. That's not what I'm saying at all. But Apple went from working with a few anointed journalists to having to cope with this global attention. And not only, keep in mind too, that's global attention elsewhere in the world, not just the United States, right? And Apple has to somehow keep that in check and, keep control of that particular message too. So it was a fascinating transition. It was pretty clear at the time that Steve Dowling had been tasked with making that happen and tasked with taking Apple PR from, Apple Computer to Apple, the global juggernaut in terms of its press relations. And he did that. And what's even more amazing, in my opinion, is, and I know I'm monologuing, but what's even more amazing is that he did so without sacrificing Apple's secrecy. Without, like, Apple PR became more open without becoming open. It was more open, but it wasn't open. And Apple started working with more journalists on its own terms still. And that's really I don't know, that's interesting. He deserves massive credit. He worked for Apple for 16 years, 5 of those obviously as head of PR, and he was probably, in terms of corporate success stories, he's probably right up there.
Boy, a lot of questions I want to ask you about this. So, okay, so the first thing is, when you tell me that the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, all these, a number of these major outlets, Bloomberg, have a reporter or reporters dedicated solely to Apple. I don't know, that bothers me. And that may seem like a strange thing to ask a guy who works for something called the Mac Observer that is clearly focused on Apple. But you guys, you aren't under pressure to produce a whole lot. Scratch that. You're not under pressure to produce information that is I guess news oriented. I mean, you can do tips, tricks, you can do things in the Apple, around the Apple ecosystem. If somebody is dedicated just to Apple, is that just an unreasonable level of scrutiny? And not from the standpoint of suggesting there should be less transparency, but just, isn't there pressure to create news or create stories where there really may not be any?
Me. Suck it up, Buttercup. Suck it up, Buttercup. You got to deal with this because it's the world. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I give you that.
Has decades of having reporters dedicated to what they're doing. Chrysler, back when they were the big companies, the oil companies have reporters that are dedicated to them too. And there are stories sometimes that take multiple days, if not multiple weeks, to develop. And of course, I'm sure that even those publications that had these, well, I don't think I ever see Mark Gurman writing anything but about Apple. But then he usually has two other co-journalists, up to two other co-journalists who are also getting credit for him for work that they've done on his articles. So, I mean, this is the way the world works, and it's probably the way that the world should work. Free press is very, very important. Free press should be digging, and there should be that. We talk about this all the time, you and me, Chuck. There should be that tension between free press and the government, and to a lesser extent, maybe the free press and corporations, because there are a lot of things a lot of corporations would love to do in secret that they should not be doing.
Okay, so let's examine that just real quick, because there's some other things I want to get to, but I can't resist. I would agree with you, and just because it's been the way the world has been, and it's been that way for years for GM and the oil companies and all, it doesn't necessarily make it right. But now with a 24-hour news cycle, I mean, there was a time that maybe that was reasonable because you needed to have somebody to deliver those stories, and there wasn't the pressure to just constantly produce new things about Apple, Microsoft, GM, major oil companies. Pick your industry, pick your company. But now it seems like we have to feed the machine, and that's where I sometimes get a little concerned about a journalistic attitude that feeds into that. And what does it do to me as a consumer? How much information is being foisted on me that really doesn't deserve
Apple?
my attention?
Probably
about anybody.
Not.
About anybody.
More attention, more stories, more openness, more coverage.
That I need to see. That makes sense for me to see even as an Apple enthusiast.
Well, who's going to decide that?
Isn't that the editorial function at some point?
Yeah, sure. And there are probably all kinds of stories you haven't seen. There are all kinds of stories you haven't seen.
Okay, fair point.
Right? Every day there's probably stories that were written, chased, created, talked about, discussed, planned, and killed. There's a term for it, killing. You kill a story.
Okay. Fair point.
So, I mean, in this, it's not to say, I mean, golly. So when you've got Apple, is Apple still worth $1 trillion today?
If not, it's right at it, I think.
Let's make some sausage and find out. When you've got a company that's worth $1 trillion frickin' dollars, there are a lot of people, a lot of institutional investors. Of course, there's hedge funds and all kinds of creeps out there too. But in general, here we go. What is Apple's valuation? It's coming up, man. It's a 222. I'm sure they're still at over $1 trillion. Stock closed today. We're recording this on Wednesday. What is it? September 18th. Stock closed at 227.77. And Apple's market cap is actually $997 billion and $400 million with that closing. God, Apple must have been buying a ton of stock buybacks. But when you've got that much money, this kind of attention comes to it. When there's millions of people working in Apple's supply chain, you get this kind of attention. And then, of course, you also, Chuck, you get all the negative stuff, like when pressure groups try to use Apple to, further their message or get special. I meant activist groups use Apple, try to bring attention to their cause. One thing that really makes me tense is the criticism Apple gets for pay in China or working conditions in China or whatever in China, without any context, without the context that Apple's doing, from everything that I've been able to research, Apple's doing more than everybody else. Apple is usually paying more than everyone else, and that Apple is doing more to train workers, that Apple is doing more, spending more resources to try to enforce local labor laws. And of course, Apple is also doing things environmentally all over the world, including in China and other emerging markets, that it is not required to do by law. And yet you have activist groups, usually on the left, who are trying to make hay from something that Apple's done without ever providing that broader context. Apple's doing this and this and this wrong. Okay, that's not good. And then here's the state, here's the state of the rest of the industry, and here's what the other companies are doing, and here's what Foxconn's other employees make, and here's what Apple has done. And that sort of thing makes me tense. But again, it comes with the territory. When you're such a big company, you get this kind of attention.
I guess, and you and I've had this discussion, and we don't want to go too far down the road, but it makes me a little crazy that I see this analyst or that analyst expound on something, and I'm not prepared to say they don't know what they're talking about, because they obviously are paying a whole lot of attention, arguably more than you and I do. But at the same time, the judgment doesn't always seem to be well thought out or well supported, and yet the market reacts to it. And I know all the reasons for it and all, and I know that they have a job to do for their clients and all, but it still bothers me. And we both do our usual full disclosure here. I own a small holding in Apple stock. It's nothing significant. I wish it were, but it's not.
Likewise. And it has never affected anything that I've said about the company.
And it doesn't affect anything I do either. I couch myself as clearly an Apple fan. And I don't agree with everything they do, but I just sometimes think that they do get treated extra unfairly. But your point about them being right at $1 trillion company, yeah, it deserves.
Yeah, I'm not worried about Apple being treated unfair. I think Apple can handle it.
Yeah, they can handle it.
Funny enough, one reason why that Apple can handle it is because of the job that Steve Dowling and his predecessor Katie Cotton did.
Agreed.
See how I just brought that back full circle there, Chuck?
Yeah, that was good. That was okay. Well, so I'm going to continue that circle and spin it off in another direction.
Okay.
So Bob Iger just quit Apple's board.
Yeah.
And so after the news, after that all happened and got out and was discussed, then we started seeing stories about, Disney and Apple might have combined had Steve Jobs lived. Okay, so that's historically interesting, but with no disrespect intended to anyone, isn't it time that we stopped saying if Steve had lived? Isn't it time to accept that as a fact and just say, okay, this is now, call it Tim Cook's Apple, or just call it, the evolution of Apple, call it what you will. But isn't it time to stop looking back at what might have been and look at what is and what could be?
Says who?
Me.
Come on, man. Says who? I don't know why my camera keeps changing, by the way. I apologize for that. I understand sort of what you're saying. I think that the Iger related stories, though, is a curious choice to make to bring that particular criticism up, in that is historically interesting. And
absolutely,
and it's kind of relevant, especially with the two companies competing, soon to be competing ever more in streaming video, which is probably almost certainly the reason why Mr. Iger left. So the idea that Apple and Disney could have been one if Steve Jobs were still alive, or if he had lived longer even, that's interesting. I think and I think a lot of people don't know that. I mean, we in the blogosphere do, right? We in the echo chamber, we certainly have talked about that thing. I mean, in my science fiction book set in 2039, there's a tech giant called GoogleSoft, because I thought it would be funny if Google bought Microsoft, because when I actually came up with that, Microsoft was the big, huge company. And I thought that was funny. And then I had another company called Apple Disney. So, and I thought I was very clever with both of those. And then, of course, that sort of that these things appear to be off the table. The point, though, is that there is, I think, a whole lot about Apple that you and I might know, and that your listeners and your viewers might know, and that my readers and listeners might know that, the other 99% of the world doesn't. So, I mean, like, I get what you're saying about the, please, if Steve were alive, but at the same time, that particular example is not an eye-rolling thing. I don't think it's interesting.
No, that I grant you, and that's why I said that at the outset. This is historically interesting, but it just yeah, I did. It just feels like at this point, invoking Steve Jobs' name borders on clickbait. Not this particular one. I mean, I grant you, again, from the historical standpoint, this is valid, but it just I hear it on podcasts. I see it in articles. That we're constantly comparing Steve Jobs to Tim Cook, or Steve Jobs' Apple to Tim Cook's Apple, and man, the environments the respective CEOs and the respective companies in those iterations operate in or operated in are totally different. I'll do a full circle thing to bring it back to Katie Cotton and Steve Jobs and what they did, the way they handled PR at the time. They handled it much differently than Steve Dowling was required to now, and Steve's successor is.
A change was needed.
Well, maybe so. Maybe it was becoming unworkable. Maybe it had become unworkable.
I think it was just because of the way Apple had grown so much. Plus, Katie Cotton was Steve Jobs' right-hand person, and she can't have been Tim Cook's right-hand person. And so the relationship would have been different. The needs would have been different. I think the corporate needs of the company were different. And going back to the, people invoking Steve, I get why that happens. Because for one thing, you get to project anything you want onto passed away Steve Jobs, right? Like, the Apple Watch would not have shipped in the iteration that it shipped in with Apple Watch 0, right? I get to say that. And it's obviously true. I think that most people would agree with me, but we don't really know, right? We don't even know if Steve Jobs might have put the kibosh on the entire thing. And it's possible that the only reason why Apple Watch saw the light of day is because Tim was so desperate to get his own product out. That's possible. But the reality is that I think Tim Cook's analysis that the wrist was an interesting place for wearable computing, that Steve might well have ended up getting on board with that, and might well have shipped a product, and it probably would have been smoother and better and shipped later than Apple Watch actually shipped. Those things are probably true, but it's so easy for me to project that on there. And then at the same time, anyone who wants Apple to do something differently, it's just such an easy go-to idea to latch hold of. This wouldn't have happened if Steve were alive. And so, I mean, I guess I get where it comes from, and because I get it, I don't react too strongly when I see it, because I get where it comes from.
Well, I get where it comes from too, and you and I both had the privilege of being in the same room during a Steve Jobs keynote to see and feel the crowd reaction.
I think the closest I ever got to him, by the way, was a picture of him and Bob Iger. I was about 10 feet away from him. I got a really nice picture of the two of them.
Okay, yeah, and I almost got run over by him once in New York on the show floor by he and his phalanx of security.
Sure,
but you got to see him in one of his elements clearly, and so I react to it strongly, and maybe that's why I feel this way. Maybe it feels borderline disrespectful at some point to just keep bringing them up in anything other than, at this point, a historical perspective.
I don't think I get where you're coming from. I don't think we as his survivors, the survivors of a public figure, I don't think we owe him anything like that.
Okay.
I mean, I think I think this has always been the domain of great people when they pass, that they get invoked rightly and wrongly a lot, and I think it's partly how we're wired, and yeah, I don't think we owe Steve anything like that.
Well, maybe not. I mean, maybe it's just me, and that's okay if it is. And it's okay. We don't have to agree on this because it's certainly not critical. It's just it just struck me. When Iger brought that, I was like, yeah, because I read the articles. Of course, I read the articles, and you can't help but ponder what might have been if Apple and
Right.
Disney had come together. Who would have been the acquirer and who would have been the acquiree, or would it have been a true merger? And what could they have accomplished? And would it have been
before or after Pixar? Before Pixar,
Sorry?
probably before or after Pixar.
Yeah.
Before Pixar, it would have been Apple doing the acquiring, and after Pixar, it might well have been Disney.
Right. And how much? What kind? Would we have been into any kind of antitrust territory or monopolization territory that the regulators would have? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I doubt that.
I don't know.
I think
that's. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
It's interesting to contemplate. Put it that way.
It is interesting to contemplate. I think it's hard to make. I was going to say that I think it's hard to make an antitrust case against Apple for anything. And that includes the iBooks lawsuit from the Obama DOJ, and it includes the threat of an antitrust investigation by the current DOJ.
I would agree with that, but that doesn't stop them from doing it. And I think I see other examples of a lot more monopolization out there in the marketplace, in the tech marketplace.
Google search.
Well, Google search, it's certainly, there's, I mean, what's their competition? Bing?
Ironically, it's probably Facebook. I'm sorry, that's with ads. Went off.
Okay.
In my head, I had this whole conversation with you, but you didn't hear it.
Oh, darn. Can we rewind it and play it?
It was like the best conversation we've ever had, Chuck.
MintMobile is sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. When was the last time you considered switching your cell carrier? I'm betting it was the last time you paid your bill. There has to be a better option out there than the same big carriers that have the big retail stores and the big bills to go with them. Now, however, you do have a choice. MintMobile is a new, modern kind of carrier, doing business online so they keep the costs down. But lower costs don't mean inferior service. Mint Mobile has amazing coverage, 4G LTE data plans, and even lets you keep your existing phone if you want to. And Mint Mobile has all the options you want and use. Unlimited nationwide talk and text, and data plans that run from 3 to 12 gigabytes per month. Those big carriers want you to think that the activation process is complex and difficult, so you won't leave them. Mint Mobile shows you just how easy it is. Your SIM arrives at your door, the activation process takes minutes, not hours, and you're up and running like nothing changed. Except that it did. You just moved into the 21st century with Mint Mobile. I want you to get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free by visiting mintmobile.com/MacVoices. That's mintmobile.com/MacVoices. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Mint Mobile for their support of MacVoices. Okay, so let me throw you a couple softballs and see what you do with them.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Okay.
What is the best thing Apple is doing right now?
Ooh, privacy.
Interesting choice.
Apple's been skating to that privacy puck. I've been meaning to write about that for a while. Dave, we were talking about that in a meeting, and Dave's like, yeah, Bryan, you should write about that. And I've been meaning to and haven't done it yet. But Apple's been skating to the privacy puck for years. And no one else is. Everyone else is trying to make money off of our privacy. Apple's trying to make money by giving us privacy. Even when they screw up things like the listening, the Siri recordings being listened to without telling us.
Do you think the money's just too good for everybody else to be trying to make the money off of us, or do you think they just don't have the revenue sources? And it's in the case of Facebook, for example, that it is largely their only revenue source.
Yeah, selling our privacy. Yeah, that's how Facebook makes money.
Right.
Since selling access to us based on our privacy. Can I ask you if you're asking me if all the quote unquote free stuff we get, the products that have come around because companies could sell our privacy, if that justifies the invasions, the surveillance capitalism?
So Bryan, do you think the free stuff that we all get is a result of the selling of our information?
Well, yes. But are you asking me if it's worth it?
Well, yeah, I'll ask you if it's worth it, sure.
No. Like, Facebook is a plague upon this planet. Google is a almost as bad plague upon the planet. Actually, not. That's not true. Google is a pandemic on the planet.
Oh.
There are all kinds of products, all kinds of apps that do stuff, but man, it would just be so much better if they were not financing that with our privacy. It would just be so much better. And if that means that we don't get as many stuffs, I'm okay with that. I'm okay if Facebook had never come around into being.
This may shock you, but I agree with you.
Doesn't really shock me.
Which should probably put your judgment into doubt.
And
right
if you'd like to discuss this with us, join us on our Facebook groups.
Yes, well, exactly. I mean, because it's at some point, you have to deal with the world the way it is. The people that have left Facebook, good for you. If that satisfies your need, I'm not sure that really helps your privacy all that much at this point, but maybe it does. I have no way of knowing or measuring that, but I do wish that Facebook could offer, Facebook, Google, I mean, any of them would offer a paid something.
Yeah.
But if I want to participate, I don't know exactly how that would work. I admit I'm not quite smart enough, but at some point, okay, just if I'm paying you, don't collect my information.
Yeah, and don't peddle my information. I would love that option. I wonder though, so I don't know, what's Facebook making? $5 billion a quarter in profits? And what's the total number of Facebook users? Now, this number is probably going to include 1.56 billion. Okay, all right. 1.56 billion. Is this true? Am I getting this right? All right, somewhere in between 1.5 billion and 2 billion, or 2.3 billion, or even 3 billion. So that means that they're making a couple of bucks a quarter off of, yeah, let me pay $99 a year. I might actually use Facebook if I could pay $99 a year without, and not have my data collected and not be snooped on.
I agree completely, and that kind of circles back to the question I asked you before, is and what was the question I asked you before? The idea that why isn't Facebook doing that? Why isn't Twitter doing that? Why isn't somebody giving you that option, and then really hammering home and challenging Apple for the privacy title?
Because it calls into the question everything that they've already done. And I think that they're afraid to stir that pot. That'd be my guess.
Yeah, but at some point, at least you'd move past it. I mean, because Facebook, every other week it seems they have to appear before Congress or issue apologies or call a press conference and say, "Hey, we screwed up. We did this. We did that."
Yeah, but that's because
Wouldn't
Mark Zuckerberg did not have the wisdom to wield the power he has amassed. Facebook is constantly screwing up, and keep in mind that like seemingly near daily barrage of screw ups are just the ones we know about, right? And that is not necessarily because of Mark Zuckerberg's existence. It's because of their attitude of Facebook.
how do I argue with that? I mean, how do
Fair point.
I'm not even, I can't argue with that because it fascinates me. Any other company in any other industry would have been, I don't know, they've been shut down. They would have been censored. They would have no customers. If this were the auto industry, oh my God, but Facebook just says, "Oh, we're sorry," and keeps on doing it. And look, I'm as guilty as the next guy because I use Facebook for promotion of MacVoices to connect with my audience,
Sure.
as do you with Mac Geek Gab, or pardon me,
And
with
Apple
TDO
Context Machine.
and Apple Context Machine. Yeah, so we are part of the problem, and I fully acknowledge my part of the responsibility. I don't have any alternative.
We're not part of the problem in that we're causing the problem. There are a lot of things that Facebook does really well, which is connect people, is the big thing that Facebook does well. And they host conversations really, really well. Like Facebook groups, I think I've said this on your show. I've certainly said it a million other times. Facebook groups is my favorite feature of Facebook, right? You put a group together, people, like be it a gaming alliance, be it a podcast, be it an author, although there's author pages. But I mean, the point is that people can come together and then they can talk and they can share in their thing. Now, there are all kinds of unintended consequences with that. People siloing, misinformation being spread, lies being spread, extremists being able to find each other and organize and further radicalize more people, things like that. Those are negative unintended consequences. But the root thing of Facebook groups is great. It's all the stuff that Facebook does to monetize us that is the problem. I don't think that we're part of the problem. We're perpetuating their empire, but that's not the same as being part of the problem.
When I say part of the problem, I guess what I'm referring to, so I'm twisting what you just said, but I agree with you. But we are creating one more attraction to Facebook.
Yeah, that's true.
That is true. Yeah. As a result, I think we are slightly complicit. And if I had another really decent option that was widely adopted or could be widely adopted, I too might consider moving. But for right now, there is none. So, you're kind of stuck, which that's a terrible reason to stay, but it is a reason to stay. Okay, so let me throw you the opposite. If that's the best thing Apple's doing, what's the worst thing Apple's doing right now?
Ooh. If you'd asked me this last year, I would have said hands down iterating on existing products.
I know that's why I'm asking you this year.
It's better this year, but I think Apple still has something to prove. iMac Pro was introduced 2 years and 3 months ago and shipped 1 year and 10 months ago. Is that right? Thereabouts? So June, July, I use my fingers to count, August, middle of September. So 2 years and 4 months ago is when it was introduced, and it shipped 1 year and 10 months ago, and it still hasn't been updated. And that's not Pro. Another thing Apple, I think, is doing really poorly is way overcharging us for storage and RAM. Way overcharging us for storage and RAM.
Okay, that's a really interesting one, and I'm not sure I disagree with that. I'm not a fan of the attitude that I've heard espoused by plenty of people that I should get more for free. I don't.
Yeah, that's
because,
not my
yeah,
thing.
yeah. I mean, charge me a fair amount, but let me buy a fair amount at a fair price.
Yeah, don't charge me $1,000 for $50 worth of RAM, or $600 for $50 worth of RAM. Actually, don't even charge me $200 for $50 worth of RAM. Why don't you go charge me $100? That'd be good. That's fair. 100% markup. Okay.
So what's the logic there, Brian? Is it just because they can?
Yeah, I think so. I think Apple looks at, like, if you look at the iPhone. I mean, we're also accustomed, including me, of paying $100 or more for $10 worth of flash RAM. Right? Like the difference. Like I can't believe, by the way, that the iPhone 11 Pro, with those 12 megapixel cameras and those 3 gorgeous lenses that are taking lots of pictures, I can't believe that it ships with the Pro moniker at 64 gigs of RAM, that memory, that storage. That's insulting and worthless. Better than 32, but that thing should have started at 128. And then we're paying $150 to get it upgraded to, is that right? Is it $150 or is it $100? Making some more sausage here, Chuck.
It's okay.
Going to, what have we got? iPhone 11 Pro. Think it's $1099. Starts at $199. No, Pro, Space Gray. All right, yeah, 64 gigs at $999, 256 at $1149. So it's $150 for what is it? 3 times, 4 times more storage, and that storage is probably costing about $5. And we're just, we're all used to that. We accept that. And Apple's so successfully set up this artificial pricing structure based on storage for its iPhones and iPads, and we all accept it. And it's kind of crazy that they do that. But by doing so, they can protect those margins while still offering a somewhat lower entry level.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
Can you use a 64 gig iPhone 11 Pro? Sure. Yeah, you may have to make some compromises, but you can certainly use it. But it does give an entry level into that. And
yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with. I don't have any problem with the 64 gig iPhone 11.
Okay,
it is more of an entry level device. It's the calling the iPhone 11 Pro a pro device, and really pitching it as a pro device for pro photographers and pro videographers. Right? What kind of movie can you record on a 64 gig iPhone 11 Pro? You can't.
Not without jumping through a bunch of hoops. No.
A bunch of hoops. Of course, anyone who's going to be serious about that is going to buy the bigger one, which kind of comes back to our point, right? About the pricing for that being for the margins at the high end. But then it's the Mac where pricing on RAM and storage is way more egregious. Like, what is, like, looking at the iMac, which is a device that I would like to get a new one of, 27 inch, right? So what are we starting at? Let's look at the bottom one. $1799 is where we start. That's with 8 gigs of memory, which is criminal. If you bump that up to 16 gigs, it's $200. If you bumped up to 32 gigs, it's $600. Now, if I go over to Mac Sales, OWC, Other World Computing, company I definitely like, and I look at their iMac RAM pricing, I can get 32 gigs for $192. And it is quality RAM.
And depending on which iMac, you can do that upgrade yourself.
With the current iMac, you can. With the current iMac Pro, LOL, you'd have to either pull the case apart yourself or take it to a shop that'll do that for you. You do have to split the case.
And I think that voids the warranty too.
I don't think it does if Apple does it.
Yeah, but is Apple going to install third-party RAM for you?
No, they would install their own RAM.
Yeah. So
but you're paying the price.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's criminal. Yeah. $600, and that's upgrading from 8 to 64. So really, that's 56 gigs of RAM for $600 Apple's charging. That's criminal.
I know what you're saying. I mean, I don't think it's literally criminal because it's their toy store. Yeah, it's their store.
Sure.
If you don't
Definitely not actually criminal.
Yeah, if you don't want to buy it, you don't have to buy it. So interesting choices on both of those, Brian. And I can't say that I really disagree that strongly with either one. I think the privacy is definitely a high point. And the storage thing is definitely a low point at this time.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, storage and RAM has been an issue for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Apple's charging $500 for a terabyte SSD. Come on, man.
Well, again, how do I argue with that? I mean, I know they put high quality SSDs in, but the prices are coming down for SSDs radically.
Just radically.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but there was a time that I would never have considered using an external SSD for much of anything because of the price. And now I think I own 2 or 3 of them.
Sure.
Because they are affordable and they make so much sense. And
sure,
man, are they fast.
Sure.
So, that's what we're all seeking.
Yeah.
So as we wrap this up, I have to ask, what new hardware are you expecting in the next couple of days?
I am getting the iMac 11 Pro. I am getting the iPhone 11 Pro, Midnight Green, as it's called, the first non-black or gray iPhone I've ever paid for. I have an Apple Watch Series 5 on the way, and I got the entry-level iPad, but I got that because I need it for working on iPad for Dummies, the 11th edition. So that's a work related choice. I've got the current iPad Pro, and that's I spend way too much time on that every day. But I need this other device, and I'll probably sell it once I'm done with the book.
So, what configuration for the iPhone Pro?
I got the 256, the 1149 one.
Okay, all right. Because I've got the same thing coming. I remained at space gray, I should say. The covers just don't hold that much appeal for me, and I figured that all the reports have been that those are a little harder to come by and may be delayed unless you got yours in really early. So, which I'm sure you did.
I got it at 18 minutes, and that was already pushed back from October 4th to the October 11th, and it hasn't changed since. It's still saying October 4th to October 11th.
Okay,
so we will see.
Yeah. Why the green? Any particular reason, or just something different? It's pretty. Okay. Well,
it's pretty. I mean, and it's kind of ridiculous because I do always put a case on my my iPhones. I actually always put a case. Side rant. Apple's leather smart cover is very convenient. It's very useful. It's very elegant, and doesn't do anything to protect your device. At least not on the corners and sides. My I don't know if you can. I don't know if this will show up, but if let's see, can you see how scuffed up the?
Yeah,
it's from dropping it not very far with a case on it. My fault for trusting that case when it doesn't have edges on it. So I guess that's on me. But anyway, I do always put a case on my iPhones. So why I'm bothering getting the forest green when it sort of like trips up my OCD a little bit? It's like, yeah, definitely supposed to be black. Yeah, phones are supposed to be black. It's supposed to be gray. It's supposed to be definitely black. It's like in my mind, that's what an iPhone should look like. I know that's crazy, by the way. So out there, like I know that's crazy. My point is that it's just so attractive. I love that color. The color green floats my boat.
Well, but there you go. I mean, that's marketing, and they made a color that apparently up to this point none of the other colors have appealed to you enough for whatever reason. But this one punched your buttons. So
this one definitely punches my buttons.
Good for Apple.
Yeah,
your buttons are not easy to punch, my friend.
I would have gotten the black one. So is it really all that good for Apple? I mean, they would have gotten my money one way or the other.
They just got it under a different heading this time.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm on the AT&T Next plan, so getting a new phone every year is baked into what I'm doing. That's the biggest reason why I'm getting this device. I love my iPhone XS. Of course, I said that about the iPhone 10 that I probably wouldn't have upgraded to the XS if I wasn't on the Next plan.
The Next plan makes. I mean, I grant you, it makes it so easy. Because I do the same thing when someone else did it ahead of me and said, basically the payments don't change. You just keep on going where you are. If they do, they change just very little depending on what configuration you bought.
Yeah, exactly.
So why wouldn't you put the new phone in your pocket?
When I need to write about it, yeah. If I was just, if this wasn't part of my job, if I was paying for it directly, I'd probably be a wee bit more frugal. But as it is, I need to be able to write about these devices. So we are not normal when it comes to things like this.
No, but I will say this. I mean, and again, as we record this, all the first wave of reviews are coming out, and a number of them are saying that this was obviously the best iPhone camera that's ever been. I saw several that said this is the best camera on a phone, period, at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Chuck. The Android world tends to focus on hardware specs. Really, they tend to focus on megapixels, right? There are Android devices out there that have like 52 or 42 or 50 megapixel cameras, which what are you going to do with that photo on your phone? I mean, it doesn't take a lot of those photos to fill up a lot of storage. And I'm also often quite reminded of a professional photographer buddy of mine, very good photographer, great photographer. And I'd always talk about wanting, I have a Nikon. It's like a, 1.5, it's a 5 megapixel camera. And it's a lower end. It was the lower end of Nikon's 5 megapixel range at that time. And my point is, I would talk to him about, I want to get a new camera. I want to get this particular Nikon model because it has, it's doing, 12 megapixels or 18 megapixels or whatever. And he was like, man, megapixels don't matter. So this is my favorite camera right here. I've got this camera, and this camera was 12 or 18 at the time. And I've got this camera. This camera is 6 megapixels. This is my go-to camera. And he point to a large print photograph that was hanging on his wall. And he said that print was taken with this camera. And it's really not the megapixels, I have come to learn. And the Android world tends to focus on that in particular. And what Apple is doing is they're doing this marriage of hardware and software. Of course, that's what they do, right? That they, this marriage of hardware and software. But when it comes to their camera stuff, they're doing things that no one else is doing. And the Android world likes to say, "Oh, yeah, but our cameras have better specs." And Apple doesn't bother to reply. But in my opinion, the obvious reply to that is, yeah, but the iPhone is doing way more with its camera than you could ever do with yours.
I mean, I agree that this, and it's surprising that the major manufacturers haven't figured out how to get into the computational photography market just a little better. It feels like they've pretty much seeded it, at least at the consumer to mid level, to Apple and to the smartphones on both sides.
There's no money.
There really isn't, and I feel like there could be, because the options for lenses, because the one thing that the iPhone can't do is it can't give you that depth of field in exactly the same way or to the same degree. It can simulate it, and it can simulate it very effectively, but it can't do it optically, because what I'm recording with now has a lens that is roughly that.
Yeah, it's got a focal length that is much, much, much longer than the iPhones.
Yeah. So, but in some ways I almost, this is somewhat sacrilege, but I wish that there was a really good Apple supplied option for lenses. That said, there are a number of great lens systems out there for the iPhone. The biggest problem with them is that each time Apple iterates the iPhone, you have to get a new lens system.
A new lens kit, yeah.
Yeah,
it is true. But the idea of like why Apple's competitors are like ceding this territory is because they don't. When I said there's no money, I mean they don't have the hardware profits that Apple has to support that development. And I'm sure they would love to get into that, but who's going to finance it? Google could, obviously, but there's so much, so now Google finances that for maybe the Pixel for themselves, but they really don't sell enough to justify that kind of expenditure. They do that investment for their licensees. Well, now you got a lot of stuff you got to control, and a lot of things that Google doesn't have control over when they're working on it. Like Apple is in such a unique place with this stuff.
Yeah. And one of the reasons they are is that they're charging those premium prices for their products based on RAM, based on storage, based on whatever. But, that
the starting price too.
Yeah. But that gives them the war chest to fund the research and fund this. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, you just can't get away from, you get what you pay for.
You do get what you pay for. Big believer in that, man.
So, Bryan, we never get enough time. This has been fun.
Yeah.
In fact, we never got to about half a dozen questions that I had for you. So we got to get you back after things. What
was the best question you didn't ask?
Ooh, what was the best question? Nah, I'm going to save it. I'm not going to give it away.
Oh, come on. What was the worst question you didn't ask?
No. I don't even, wait a minute. You're stealing my shtick. You're stealing my shtick.
Don't answer that one, man. Don't answer that one.
So what are you doing now? I mean, obviously you're at the Mac Observer. Obviously you're doing Apple Context Machine. What else are you doing at this point?
I'm doing the 11th edition update to iPad for Dummies. It's been 2 years since the last one, so there's actually a lot to update on it, including the big change, obviously, to iPad OS as opposed to just iOS. And that's probably my biggest time commitment other than TMO right now.
How's the novel going? I have to ask because we didn't touch on that this time.
I have a full request out with a fantastic agent, and I am hopeful. She said that my partial was great. Partial meaning the first 3 chapters. She said, this is great. I can't wait to read more. So getting that full request is always fantastic, and I'm really hoping that she likes the rest of it as much as she liked the beginning.
Great.
So
Well,
we're still trying to find an agent.
We're sending our best thoughts to you, and look forward to seeing it. Well, I guess in paper or in.
Have you read it? I forget.
No, I have not.
So because you didn't want to, or because I didn't offer it?
I don't know that you've offered it, but that's. I would not want to step on it.
See me afterward.
See you. You got it. You got it.
You behind the bleachers. I'll hand it to you.
Good. Yeah. Brown paper bag, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Bryan, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for the time. I know you have nothing else to do, and I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me, Chuck. I always love being on your shows, and I wish that I made more time to make it happen.
Well, you give us plenty of content, and we really do appreciate it.
Thanks.
Folks, this is MacVoices. I'm Chuck Joyner. I hope you've gotten something out of this. Hopefully, Bryan and I made you think. I would definitely be interested in your reaction, though, to any of the comments. So you can find us on Facebook at the MacVoices group page. You can drop me an email, chuck@MacVoices, or you can always, MacVoices.com, excuse me. And you can always find me on Twitter as well. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.